go. There you go. Fantastic.
There we go. Okay, can everybody hear us? Yes. Okay. Yes, I'm returning.
Janet, you're there.
Yes, Asher, we're returning this. It's
Okay.
incredibly difficult, and has shown me that my knowledge of the halacha is stronger than my knowledge of the Bible, which is interesting. So they're like, how do you know the Jewish law or like that? Okay. Okay. Brain Kabbalah. Okay. Good to see everyone. Thank you for being here, for coming back for this. This does need to be the last session. I realize, especially with everything that is going on right now, around the city. I will share, just read this morning, a letter back from Meow Wolf to the JCRC, which I think is going to need another letter in response, but is a step in the right direction, so that's a good thing. Okay, our blessing before study is La'asok b'divrei Torah, which thanks God who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Let me fill in, and I'm just going to need to be sure we have the doors locked deliberately. If I'm talking and you hear someone at the door, if someone can just go and check, it should be a friendly. Okay, where did we get up to?
18, maybe?
Yes, I was thinking 17, like so.
Yeah.
So it's actually 16. We didn't do the 2-4, did we? No, so it's page 16. Okay, so what I need to do is pull up the PDF and Mysticism handouts. There we go.
Congratulations on being so good at OWL and all this.
You know, I think I need a mouse. That's the one thing I really do need.
Oh, yeah.
I need a mouse. It's much easier with a mouse. Okay, page 6, 7. We're still heading that way. 11. Okay. Let's just get ourselves in the brain space again. So reminding ourselves, as we've been looking at for a while, including yesterday's Torah study, of the Kabbalistic tree of life. So what I need to do is, I almost got that very wrong because I now need to share my screen. Give me a second to agree. Okay, now I make you bigger and then share screen and then pull the handouts up. There we go. Okay, now you can see. So a reminder that what we underlying a lot of this is the Kabbalistic tree of life. The 10 different emanations of God, the 10 different ways of approaching God, experiencing God, the 10 ways that God's influence works down to us. The top 3 are inaccessible to us, Keter, Chochma, and Bina. And the bottom 7 are certainly more accessible to us. Excuse me, and Malchut, the very bottom one, is the most accessible to us. We are essentially just under that. So Malchut, God's kingship, is the way that we can most easily refer to God. And what's important about this is that this is not saying that is God. And so we touched on this yesterday, in fact, in Torah study, and also in the service, that just because we call God Melech, Eloheinu Melech Ha'olam, doesn't mean God is a male king. It's just that is one aspect of God that we can approach. And maybe we can approach that aspect of God closer because of the patriarchal bias of our society. And so there's an interesting question as we get, like, is one creating the other? As I said before, if horses had gods, they'd look like horses. Is the patriarchy of the Jewish liturgy because of the Kabbalistic system, or is it vice versa? There's which feeds which. And so if we created a more equal society, would we end up having to change the tree of life? Which I actually think is a very interesting question. It's not necessarily one for now. The idea is at least having these 10 emanations and having these 22 different ways to connect them that relate to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And somebody mentioned, I meant to count it, somebody mentioned yesterday in Torah study that in this picture there are 18 triangles. And I'll need to check those. 1, 2,
I
3,
counted.
4, 5, 6,
We counted
so
many more.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, there's more. Okay, fine. Because I was going to say that would be really impressive. 18 as high, that would be really impressive. But yes, there's definitely more. Okay. So that is underlying the system that we are looking at. We're now turning to page 16, and we're going to see if we can get through a fair amount of this, because we really do need to wrap up today. And I do want to see if we can get to the end. So someone to read for us, and remembering that we have these two translations, the Mordechai Kaplan translation and the Jill Hammer translation. Mordechai Kaplan's is much more, if you follow these steps, then you can, it's almost magical. It's partly meditative, but it's also magical in the sense of do these things to create a change in the world. Whereas Jill Hammer's perspective is much more do these things so that you can access gates. It's much more meditative, reflective, and it's difficult to know which one is correct. Now, interestingly, in the print, in the handout, not on the screen, but in the handout, it's translated the Hebrew into Greek, which is very interesting. I'm not sure why, but for those who are to make it easier, good. So for those who are reading on the screen, it is Hebrew, and for those who are reading on the paper, I promise you, it's actually meant to be Hebrew. Someone to read for us, please. So for Mordechai Kaplan's translation.
Kaplan, 22 foundation letters. God placed them in a circle like a wall with 231 gates. The circle oscillates back and forth. A sign for this is that there is nothing good higher than the light. There is nothing evil lower than plague.
Plague. Okay, so the circle. What are we talking about here? So this can be read in the imperative. Place these 22 foundation letters in a circle. So instead of God place them in a circle, you can read it as an imperative. Place them in a circle like a wall with 231 gates. And that's exactly what this picture is below.
Oh.
Right? So if you take the 22 letters and you basically pass each letter, connect each letter to each other letter, you have 231 gates and a very nice weaving pattern or sewing pattern, right? It's actually surprising when you think about it, with so much Jewish art, how little you see something like this. Yeah. And that's probably because of the concern of danger. The concern of this is not just some arty-farty thing that you can do. Look, isn't this pretty? This is much more ways of accessing divinity that if you combine letters and so on, it brings about a change in the world. Marlene.
Are we supposed to see this as two-dimensional or multi-dimensional?
I would say that the wall that is two-dimensional, that this is two-dimensional. Yet at the same time, if you remember from the previous times, we were looking at time in a dimensional sense and others. So the whole system, actually, sometimes they talk about 15 different dimensions and 4 dimensions and so on. So I would say here, this image, I think, is two-dimensional, specifically because of the idea of placing them in a circle, not placing them in a sphere. And the circle, but when it says the circle oscillates back and forth, so you're continually moving around it. This is a vibrant channeling, I would say. So the Kabbalists present an important meditation regarding these gates. And I think it's important that they're called gates, because this is ways to access divinity. Based on a text in the first chapter, engraven them like a garden, carve them like a wall, deck them like a ceiling. So the initiate, the person who is trying to delve deeper into this mystical experience, has to contemplate the ground, visualizing it as murky black mud, and then must engrave the 22 letters, forming each one in his mind. And I appreciate it says his, and we are certainly outnumbered in gender here, but bearing in mind, you know, the tradition from which this comes was very strongly gendered at the time. These should make a circle in the ground, and then he must carve them like a wall. He carves each letter out of the ground, with carve in inverted commas, stands each one up, making a circle of letters surrounding him like the wall. This is all visualization. You got to really know your Hebrew letters for this. One of the major Kabbalists, Rabbi Isaac of Akko, speaks of a similar meditation where the letters are visualized on the horizon, so that everywhere where you look is letters. And next, the initiate must deck them like a ceiling. So first you imagine them on the ground, then you imagine a wall around you, and then you imagine the 231 lines connecting the 22 letters, depicting them as a ceiling over their head. So now that's where we move into more Marlene's sort of three-dimensional question. So when I say on paper, it's two-dimensional, but the way that you use it is different. The way you use it has more of a sense of being surrounded by it. So once he imagines the 231 lines depicting him as a ceiling, once you've completed the exercise, you're ready to make use of the circle. If you wish to use it to create, you must proceed in a direct order, beginning with Aleph. Focusing the mind on the Aleph, you then follow each of the 21 paths emanating from Aleph to all the other letters from Bet to Tav. So you go Aleph Bet, Aleph Gimel, Aleph Dalet, and so on. Continues in this matter until using all the other letters, right? So this is 231 things, and you have to get it absolutely right. So really difficult when you're halfway through, you're like, wait, did I do Bet? Or did I do like Ayin Lamed, or did I just Mem, or did I whatever, right? Then it's all broken, it's all gone. According to some, I'll come to you in a second, Jean. According to some, this is also a technique for making a golem. If one wishes to destroy it, one proceeds in the precise opposite direction, beginning with Tav and ending with Aleph. So let's talk about a golem just very briefly. So the idea, and I'll come to Jane in a moment. The idea behind the golem is this is an important Jewish story. Many people believe it influences Frankenstein and similar narratives. The idea behind the golem is in a time of absolute crisis, the Maharal of Prague sees that the people are defenseless, basically, against anti-Semites who are trying to kill them, and summons this golem from clay. And so the natural, obvious question is, how? Because would we need to do that again at any time? We should have that knowledge. And so the Sefer Yetzirah, many people believe the Sefer Yetzirah is what the Maharal of Prague used to create this golem. Because what you often hear is he made a man from clay and then wrote Emet on his forehead. Aleph, Mem, Tav, first, middle, last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which spells out truth. And so then it goes and fights for truth. But it's not Emet that animates it. It's the Emet that drives it. It's the Emet, the truth, is its mission. Many people mistakenly think by writing Emet, that's what gives it life, but it's not. And the reason they believe that is because at the end, when it starts running amok, he rubs off the Aleph and it says Met, and it dies. But so they, sorry, Met is death, yeah. Right? So what happens is that's its task. Its task is truth, and its task is death, its own death. So the question is, how did it actually come to be? And so the suggestion is that it's through this, through the actual act of meditation and reflecting on the letters, because remembering the letters are what God used to create the universe. So it says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. V'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu. The earth was unformed and void, and then God spoke. So the act of creation is in speaking, and is in speaking Hebrew words. Now you may turn around and say, well, of course it's Hebrew words because the Torah is written in Hebrew. What did God actually speak? And the Torah says it's right here in the Hebrew. God created using Hebrew words. So using the letters, you can therefore imitate God. We are created in God's image. So what is that image? That image is the ability to create, in the minds of the sort of magical Kabbalists who believe that this is not just a reflection on creation, but this is actually a sort of magical incantation. Jane.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back very briefly to the first statement of Kaplan of the 22 foundation letters. And when he says there's nothing higher than delight and nothing lower than the plague. Is this a historic comment of when the Kabbalists started? Because before the Inquisition and everything, we were basically accused of starting the plague. Is this a reference to that?
Right, so thank you for clarifying. What we have here, when you said this comment in Kaplan, I should have reminded, and it's okay, it's been a couple of weeks. This is Sefer Yetzirah. This is chapter 4, section 2. All of this is Sefer Yetzirah. It's not Kaplan's comment, it's just Kaplan's translation of this very terse text. What this is trying to say, and it's lost in those who are reading from the Greek, well, maybe it's not actually, it's saying what you can do with letters can create reality, or just changing letters around changes things. Oneg is delight, nega is plague, it's the same letters. And so what it's saying is, when you have the Aleph Nun Gimel in the world, and the Nun Gimel Aleph, Ayin Nun Gimel, or the Nun Gimel Ayin, what you can do with it is you can do good or not. And so it's like that sort of DNA code or the matrix code, that if you have the code, it looks similar, but it spells out something very different. And so when it says there's nothing higher than delight and nothing lower or evil than plague, I think more than anything else, it's less a historical comment and much more a comment on, look, if you change letters around, you can do extraordinary things. You can go from the highest to the lowest. Okay, let's have a look, scroll up. Yeah, this is where a mouse would be really helpful. There we go. Okay. Okay. Some commentaries present a more primitive method, where the initiate actually draws a circle around the object that he wishes to form. Proceeding in a circle, he chants the letter combinations, first Aleph with all the other letters, then Bet 231 times until the alphabet is completed. And if one wishes to destroy the creation, you got to put your golem that's rampaging in the circle and go the other way and do your 231 backwards, which is really difficult. It's also, trust me, when I did a golem the other day, it was like, you got it anyway. It's also related. The disciples of the Riva attempted to use the Sefer Yetzirah to make a creature. They went in the wrong direction, however, and sunk in the earth up to their waists through the power of the letters. So therefore, they cried out for help, trapped. He was finally contacted and told his other disciples to recite the alphabet while proceeding in the opposite direction until the others were freed. And there is some question as to whether proceeding here means one should actually walk around the circle, whether it means that one must merely move around it mentally and meditatively. I think it's rather extraordinary it's one thing to talk of golems, and a golem is a historico-fictional tale, in the sense that it's clearly fictional, but it is embedded in our history. And we know it's not actually something that arose. We didn't actually have a golem that fought on behalf of our people. And yet the golem is so inherently part of Jewish identity that in some sense it did. What's being told here, however, is something different, which is this isn't a sort of mythology saving the Jewish people. This is people doing magic and it going wrong, and them literally being sunk and stuck. Frankly, as I'm sharing this, I'm thinking, I could totally use this for my Hellboy role-playing game. I was like, I can totally use this in an adventure, right? This is similar to the kind of story where a rabbi's walking along, it's a Friday, he needs food, and he says the right words, the right letter combinations, up pops a cow, he slaughters the cow. I've shared this story before. He slaughters the cow, and then they can eat. That's serving positively. But I think what's important about this is warning of danger, of really profound danger. If you get it wrong, it's not just saying you can end up stuck, right? You can, like, the earth can swallow you up almost like half a Korach. In Torah, Korach is challenges Moses' leadership, and the earth swallows him up and all his followers up alive. There's something to be said for, if you're messing with creation, you can undo the whole of creation. We often see this with CERN, when they're exploring fundamental particles, and they say, well, it's actually going to be very interesting because we'll be able to create a mini black hole. And everyone's like, I'm not sure we want you to do that, right? Maybe that would be a really bad thing in the middle of Switzerland. And so there's something very similar, and that comparison isn't trite. What we're doing here, if you believe the sort of Kaplan model as opposed to the Hammer model, if you believe the Kaplan model of this is manipulating divine code in order to manipulate the world, you can destroy the world, or at least you can destroy yourself. And so there's a profound risk to this. According to the early Kabbalists, the 231 gates are alluded to in the name Yisrael. In Hebrew, I'm sorry, how ironic that I misspelled the word spelled. In Hebrew, Israel is spelled Yisrael. Is that in Greek here? Yeah,
Yes,
sorry.
yes.
These letters can be rearranged to spell out Yesh Ralah, which means Resh Lamed Ayin, which means there are 231. Now, that's a pretty impressive wordplay, I think. Of course, when you have so many words and letters, you can find anything. This is part of Bible codes and so on. Nonetheless, if you're a Kabbalist and looking for proof of all the names that our people could have had, Yisrael is, it's right there. It's not, all you have to do is rearrange two letters, the Lamed and the Aleph, and change the sin to a shin, and it's Yesh. There are 231. And of all the letter combinations, there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. You combine them all together, you get 231. So for the Kabbalists, this is Israel. This is being Israel. This is being Jewish. This is the fundamental being of our people, which is to be sort of guardians of the code, guardians of the creation, the keepers of the mystical secret. And so that elevates our people in a totally different way. It also elevates our prayer in a totally different way, just to be clear, because when we pray, we traditionally pray in Hebrew, although you are also required, or not required, you're also permitted to pray in a language that is meaningful to you. So in Mishnah in Sanhedrin, I want to say chapter 10, maybe 9 or 10, it says that if it comes to Tefillah, if it comes to the Amidah, if it comes to Shema, you can pray it in your language, in the vernacular, because you need to understand it. But when you pray in Hebrew, it does something else. And when you look at this chart, if you imagine this while you're praying Hebrew, now what you're doing is you're resonating with the building blocks of the universe. You're not just praising God or thanking God. Almost see it musically. You're playing the vibrations of the universe. You're making sound that connects to every single thing, because everything is made up of aleph and bets and gimels and dalets and so on. So every time you use a Hebrew word, when they say it's the Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, it's not just holy in that this is the language that we use to talk to God. It's holy in the sense of it resonates with the entire universe. And so prayer, Jewish prayer, suddenly becomes imbued with a profound different sense of what it means just to use Hebrew.
So this extends the idea of the chosen people.
So the chosen people are, I guess, I don't know, because we're not chosen specifically to be guardians of those letters. We happen to be the guardians of those letters who are chosen to perform mitzvot, who are chosen in relationship. And anyone can come into Judaism and be part of that. Unless maybe you say chosen in the sense of this is our task. If you say this is our task, then that is much more like other peoples have their tasks. And I guess, yeah, it's not a bad idea actually, because, hold on a sec, because then it's like the priests in the tabernacle. They're not better than the rest of the people. They're just a select group of people who have a specific task. And so you could say that the Jewish people, or the Kabbalists perhaps, are chosen to make sure, if nothing else, that these letters are used properly. I think. So let's say Phil, then Phil.
So I've been watching your language, and so this is really theological string theory, right?
Yes. Yes, it absolutely is. Right. And I think this is going beyond matter and energy, as people say today. This is about fundamental particles. This is about the being of creation, I think. So yeah, I think so.
So Hebrew, the actual alphabet was developed about 3,000 years ago, coming out of the Phoenician alphabet. So somebody had to take whatever was available to them and develop, and there are multiple alphabets that came to be around that time also. Take those letters, take the other, or everybody else's, and then develop this form of writing. And it went through a transition also.
Right. So here's the thing. The Kabbalists have no sense of the origin of Hebrew language. Mm-hmm. Aleph comes from Elef. If you draw an ox, right, there's your happy ox. I don't know if the people on the screen can see that. Right? There's your happy, maybe just pass that down, and so it's closer to the thing. There you go. There's your happy little ox. Right, there's your primitive ox, and then if I can have that back, it doesn't take long for that to develop into that, right? Into Aleph. You just pass that down, right? The Elef, which is the ox, becomes the Aleph, right? So Hebrew letters come from pictograms, right? Vav means a hook. Bet comes from bayit, meaning house, and so on. So we modernists can look at this and say, right, okay, so this is the origin of this. The Kabbalist says, but this came from God, because this is the blueprint of the universe. A modern Kabbalist might perhaps say that this is like archaeology. You've got to dig through the dirt before you get to it. So it had to go through Phoenician and Proto-Sumerian and everything else before it was fully revealed. That's a nice out to that this is the fundamental part of the universe. You could say it was, but then it got hidden and it just needed to be revealed.
So this
how
is like
Ten
a,
Commandments inscribed.
So what were the 10 Commandments inscribed in is a very good question, actually. It's a very good question. The Kabbalist would say without question the Hebrew letters. The archaeologist would say, of course not. Right? Cindy.
oh, no, it was just like the hieroglyphs were coming out of the mud. And then going on up into
Gates.
the gates.
Go on, what do you mean?
So
When you say hieroglyphs, do you mean
like
the sort of
your
pictograms?
ox, like
Oh, the
your
pictogram, right?
pictograms,
Sorry,
yeah.
so hieroglyph is very specifically
Yeah,
Egyptian.
okay,
That's why I
yes,
was
sure,
right.
sure.
Right, okay.
But the pictograph would be
Yes.
like it coming out of the mud. So you have to sit there long enough to have it come out of the mud.
Yes.
And then you visualize the letters as the columns coming around and then the gates following.
Yeah, yes. This is not a short meditative exercise,
No,
right? This is really huge.
it's like years in the making.
Maybe,
That-
I think it's lifelong.
but in
Yeah.
order to be able to do this, you have to do it in one go, right? You can't sit there and go, right, okay, so I'm going to do Aleph to Zion before lunch, and then I'm going to have a break, and I'm going to come back and do this, right? This is all in one sitting. So this is a different kind of, very often when we engage in meditation reflection, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour to push, right? I mean, depending how, there are people who can go an hour or so on. This is going to take a long time to really hold this image almost. And it is interesting that it is conjuring up an image of a sort of net of gates above us and so on, because it's moving away from mantra and moving into imagery that may be a bit challenging, because as soon as you move into imagery, you risk idolatry essentially, and so how we hold that is quite a challenge. What color are these letters? It doesn't say. Later is fire and water and so on. How are we envisaging them? How are we envisaging these gates? Are we envisaging them like in colors, in a particular form? I think it runs a risk. That
sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting for sure, right? Right. Okay, let's go back to sharing. Let's look at Jill Hammer's understanding of this, of the same passage. Okay. Let me just check. Okay. She says 22 letters engraved, carved, commuted, weighed, and exchanged. How did God weigh and exchange them? Aleph with them all, and all of them with Aleph. Bet with them all, and all of them with Bet. And they all repeat in a cycle. Thus they emerge from 231 gates. And so it is that all creation and all speech emerges from one name. That's the same translation of what Kaplan put that's a translation of the same passage of what Kaplan put in page 16. It's a totally different way of reading this. So, again, we enter God's workshop, she says. God is busily at work, forming each letter with its unique traits, engraving and carving it as a channel for creation. God smelts the letters as a silversmith or blacksmith might. The root of the word seraphan, he permuted them, also means to smelt. God is working with the letters in combination, weighing them against one another, exchanging them one for another. Exchange seems to mean permute, as in arrange the letters in various combinations. Like a jeweler, God is stringing the letters in different orders to make different creations. That's an immediately different kind of image, a different kind of approach. That this is building up something beautiful and ornate. The verbs that describe God's action, chakakan Chatzavan, Sarfan, Shakalan, Imiran have a beautiful sound when one says them together. These words have a mantra-like quality. One could repeat the words and shift one's consciousness. The entire passage seems to point toward the experience of trance. This is a huge difference to what Kaplan's saying. Kaplan's doing a building up manual, like an spiritual IKEA instruction. She's saying, say these words, Chakakan, Chatsavan, Sarfan, Shakalan. Hear it, see what it's doing to you. Use these words themselves to create some kind of trance-like state. And then the passage instructs the reader in the practice of combining the letters in groups of 2 from Aleph to Tav. This process spells out a massive and complex divine name, composed of all 22 letters in combination with one another. This complex divine name is a way of naming a vast array of diverse creations. It may be that the combination process, an intense mantra-like process that occupies the mind deeply, is a trance-inducing ritual that allows the reader to reenact God's creative process. That's similar to Kaplan. In the book of creation, the Sefer Yetzirah, the power to change one's consciousness and the power to create worlds are inextricably linked. So what Hammer's saying here is really important, that this isn't just a trance, this isn't just magical incantation, this is meeting God. This is being able to name God beyond the simplistic names of Adonai, Shekhinah, Elohim, Shaddai, El, all this kind of thing. That God and creation are linked, that God expresses God's self through creation. And if that's the case, then creation, or the building blocks of creation, are an expression of God. And if the building blocks of creation are Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, and so on, then all the different combinations are a name of God. The passage, he says, offers a practice for the combination of letters in which the first letter, Aleph, is combined with all the other letters. It appears this is done both visually and orally. So the practice might sound like Ab, Ag, etc., and look like a series of 2-letter combinations. According to the text, the letters repeat in a cycle, meaning one moves through them in a pattern from Aleph to Tav, and presumably can begin again with Aleph. Later Jews understood the practice of letter combination to create golems and so on. And let's just finish this bit. The phrase all creation and all speech emerges from one name illustrates the word is matter and matter is word. God is the author of words and things, channeling both into being by means of the letters which are the name. The human practitioner who undertakes the combination ritual also enters into a mythic reality where intentional speech becomes real. Each and every being arises from a combination of letters that is part of the name. We might say that the world is the divine name, and all of its myriad phenomena are syllables of that name. Nature is a manifestation of God, albeit in a complex and multiple form. One sacred reality combines and recombines itself to form all things. I think this paragraph is one of the most important of the whole lot. Excuse me. In Judaism, speech counts. Speech really counts. In general society, words are words. I will always remember I was studying Shmirat Halashon. I'll come to you in a moment, Marlene. I was studying Shmirat Halashon, guarding the tongue, when I was at Esha Torah, the yeshiva. I had actually just lost a friend because somebody had lied about me, had gossiped about me, and the friend, turns out wasn't as good a friend I thought, I guess, believed this person. And I was really hurt by somebody else's words and the damage that they could do. And so while I was there in Jerusalem, staring over the Kotel, everyone else, well, this speaks volumes about me, everyone else was going on trips to the Golan and to Kinneret and everything else. I was like, yeah, but I'm going to study. I'm going to study the laws of Shmirat Halashon, of guarding the tongue. And one of the things that hit me like a brick to the face was the idea that each person has a word limit and nobody knows what their word limit is. So you may have 1,000 words in your life, you may have 0 words, you may have 10 million words in your life. And everyone has a divine account, basically. And every word that you share adds up. And when you get to the end of your word limit, that's the end of you. And I found that really interesting. As a young man, and everyone knows me and my words, my verbal thing, begging, please give me a big account. But what if I don't? That means that every word has to count. And if every word has to count, what are you doing with those words? And the Kabbalist says that adds an extra dimension to this by saying that you can even get to the point, not just that words count, but that words accord with reality. And words are real. In some sense, this is why I think when we pray, and I deliberately call it quiet prayer, not silent prayer. When we pray, Jewish prayer isn't in the head, it's with words. Quiet prayer is quiet enough that we can hear it, but the person sitting next to us can't. That counts as a word. So that as we're using words, we're using them to build, to create, to connect. We're not just saying stuff. And that's how we, in our society, tend to view words. It's the outward manifestation of the self, that which we want to express. Whereas the mystic says, no, this is the reality. Everything is word and matter together. Marlene and Jane.
Thank you. This is for me the paragraph that hits and fits, and the coincidence of the word for word and the word for thing being identical in Hebrew is a meaningful coincidence. And I wonder, as I'm reading this, there's just so much else that comes under this rubric, that some of which we'll get to later. But words are manifestation, words are generative. I wonder if more attention had been paid to the practical use of words and language rather than the magical creation of a being from mud, if that might change the world in a more sustainable way.
Thank you. And just for those, when Marlene refers to the Hebrew, the word is davar. A davar is a word, and it's also a thing. So duvarim are words or things. And so the reality of words is really important. Words can kill. We actually know that words can literally kill. You can destroy a person with words to the point that the body just gives up. You can lift, words can give life. Somebody who is really sick, it's a mitzvah to visit them and to help them, to encourage them, to be there for them with your words. At the same time, of course, in a house of mourning, we deliberately don't. We deliberately remain silent unless the other person is talking to us. And that may be similar in terms of, there has been a loss. Now's not the time to add. Now's the time to be there and support in our presence. So the idea that word and matter are also some sense of a name of God. And how did she put it? It was such a nicely put thing. The world is the divine name and all of its myriad phenomena are syllables of that name. That in and of itself, I mean, it's the most environmental thing you could say, right? Why do we protect this species? Not because, oh, it'll be really sad if it goes, but because it's a manifestation, of divinity. It's an essence, an aspect, a syllable of God. And so you have to protect it because if you don't, then the whole world loses a way to connect to God. And so that also helps us, even the jerk, even the person like your terrible next door neighbor, right? Even the person who's just a negative influence on your life, they're a syllable of the name of God. And that changes the way that we respond to them. It makes us approach them differently by saying, I just don't agree with how they behave, but they have absolute value. And I still need to see that. That's why Torah says, for example, if you see the ass of your enemy lying down on the road, pick it up already, right? We don't harbor hatred. We don't lotikomva lotitor. You don't take revenge. You don't harbor these negative feelings. You can say, this hurt. This is painful. I'm going to set up personal boundaries, but I still recognize that they are part of creation and therefore part of God. Even to the point of the worst people in the world, the very worst, the psychopaths, the murderers, not approving in any way of who they are, but finding them as part of divine existence, I think is really important. And as Marlene put in the chat, it popped up and then it disappeared. So I don't get to see the chat, otherwise I can't see you much. But yes, words are co-creation. What we say makes a difference. It literally changes the world. Also, maybe perhaps that feeds into the rabbis saying, why was the temple destroyed? Because of sinat chinam, because of baseless hatred, which was expressed through words. It was a simple word story that ended up ruining the Jewish people, essentially. Let's look at, we've got time for this. Let's look at chapter 3, verse 6. Jane, go on before we go on.
Yeah, just real quick. When we talk about, God is busily forming the letters and changing these letters, I think of Torah, when we have the enhancements, the crowns on some of the letters and so forth. Can you speak to that? Is that something the Kabbalists pay attention to or not? Or
I don't personally remember that, but I could definitely see a very good drush there. It could be, I don't remember it. As far as I know, for them, it's more about the letters themselves, not the way they are written. That each letter is in part an essence of God, as opposed to the font. Akiva does. Hillel does. Hillel pulls out. Right. Hillel pulls out and says, every crown has meaning. Every crown on the letter. So if you have a letter shin and it has these little 3 things that come off, and Hillel says, this is actually really important, and you can derive laws and things like that from these letters, from these adornments. Off the top of my head, I don't think that's the same for the Kabbalists. I don't think they're as invested in that. But I think that adds another part, which is the importance of Torah reading and the importance of Torah study. When you read Torah, you're not just reading, here's the story of the Jewish people. You're reading about creation, you're reading about life, you're reading about the universe, you're reading about code, because the Kabbalists they don't just see combinations in 2s, by the way, they also see 3s. That goes back to a certain pop star who had it on her, tattooed on her arm. They see 3s, combinations of 3 letters, particularly from 3 different verses that have the same number of letters in the 72 letters. There are different combinations, and Torah is described as one name of God. From the Bet and Bereshit, all the way to the Lamed at the end of Yisrael, the whole thing is also seen as one huge name of God. Because speech, creation, God are all connected. Okay, let's look at the final thing. I don't think we're going to have time to go through all of it, but we're going to definitely get a taster. And this is about using Kaplan. So this is from chapter 3. Earlier on, we did have reference. I've got to see where we can find it. Earlier on, we had reference to the mothers. I'm sure we did. Yes, we did. In chapter 2, verse 1. So let's scroll all the way up to page 14. Chapter 2, verse 1, 22 foundation letters, 3 mothers, 7 doubles, 12 elementals. The 3 mothers are Aleph, Mem, Shin. Their foundation is the pan of merit, the pan of liability, the tongue of decree. The 3 letters Aleph, Mem, Shin, Mem hums, Shin hisses, and Aleph is the breath of air deciding between them. You may remember that we did something similar. I referred to something similar for Shema, Shin, Mem, Ayin, when we say sh, ah, and so on, that you're calming down so that you can hear. So chapter 2 introduces these 3 mothers, but then starts talking about the gates. So then we move on to chapter 3, where it starts saying, let's actually explore who these 3 mothers are. Someone to read for us.
Are we on page 20?
19.
19.
Kaplan, 3 mothers.
Aleph, Mem, Shin, or Amish.
Thank you. In the soul, male and female, are the head, belly, and chest. The head is created from fire. The belly is created from water. The chest, created from breath, decides between them.
Okay, and then Kaplan's commentary. Do you read a bit of that?
Sure. The soul here also refers to the body. Everything found in the body is also found in the soul. Similarly, the human body is a microcosm of the supernal man. This is the man sitting on the throne, seen by Ezekiel. The supernal man represents the array of the Sephirot. The soul mentioned here then also refers to the anthropomorphic representation of this array.
Okay, so after something so clear, now we're going into this, okay? Just to be clear, we're not talking about soul in the Christian sense of body and soul being separate. Soul, there are a number of different words for soul in Judaism, the nefesh, the ruach, the neshama, and so on. Soul is the animus, that which drives us, that which the energy of the body. I'm hesitant to use the word energy there. The body's movement, the body's being, everything in essence, maybe, yeah, essence. Ezekiel, when the prophet Ezekiel has his mystical visions, he sees essentially a man. And the Kabbalists say it's not actually a man. Of course, it's not a man. It is, because that would be idolatry. What we're talking about here instead is the Sephirot, which when he sees the man, what he sees, or the being, the person, what he sees is the Sephirot arranged around the shape of a human body. Yesod, for example, which is in the groin area, is the place of foundation and generative creativity and so on. Chesed and Gevurah, the shoulders that balance us between kindness and judgment and so on. Chokhmah and Bina, sort of wisdom and intellect, are more cerebral up at the top. And so the idea behind these 3 mothers is that they are placed as the centering part of the human body. They are placed in the The head is from fire, that's the shin. The belly is from water. The chest, created from breath, decides between them. Because what's the sound of the aleph? The aleph is silent. The aleph takes the sound of the vowel that is given to it. Other shin has a specific sound. Mem has a specific sound. Aleph depends on the vowel. So it's the determinant. It's the non-existent core of existence, because it is absolutely the first Hebrew letter, but it doesn't have a sound. We have nothing like that in English. You say A, letter A sounds like A. But Aleph, you give it a name, but how does an A sound? A or A? How does an Aleph sound? Well, it depends on who's with it. And Aleph is also number one. So Aleph is often seen as God, as the way, sort of at the center, deciding between all. It is interesting that they pick up on this idea of water and fire and so on, this sort of Greek elemental aspect, which does come into mysticism, certainly. Can we keep going a little bit more?
Sure. The head represents our creative power, which is represented by fire. The belly is our receptive power, represented by water. The chest and lungs must both inhale and exhale, and therefore pertain to both.
Now, I would be totally open to hear you say, for me, the belly is fire and the head is water. Right? Totally understand that. You could totally make that case. What they're saying is for them, for their system, that's how they see it. Any thoughts on this idea before we go on to Numbers, chapter 6? Any thoughts on this idea of matching the Sphirot onto a human being, or the vision that was seen by Ezekiel is actually a vision of Sphirot? How does this feel to you in a personal sense?
Well, personally, like the Yesod is the foundation and generative force for the male, but for the female, it would have to be higher.
Okay.
It seems very a male-centered body.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I think, again, when we come back to what does it mean to have postmodern Kabbalah, how much of it do you turn around and say, okay, yes, we do want to mirror it onto the human body. No, we do want to keep the Sphirot, but maybe the mirroring onto the human body speaks of its time. It's a real challenge. I appreciate you sharing that.
So are the Sphirot places of meeting of energy, and therefore, they're not physical in any way, shape, or form. And there may be a pathway in the metaphysical network of bringing consciousness together on that network. Therefore, if I'm meditating in one sphere, or somebody in Afghanistan is in the same, there is a linkage between humans that way that's medical and metaphysical. If this makes sense.
That's really interesting.
Because that's kind of, how I see it. I don't see it as a reality that's approached as a thing, but a network and a form of energy that goes out, and we cross those different paths, just like on that diagram.
I think, you're really pushing me. It's very good. The difficulty comes with the word energy. And is each sphere a metaphysical reality, so that one person here and one person there who are meditating on the Sephira of Gvura, are they in the same place? I think my initial thought is no. that these are places of emanation. When you say gates, when it says gates and channels, to me, the way I read it is more like they are the spring from which the water flows. They are the places where we meet God. But places is not the right word, because places, like, they're not metaphysical places. They are essences. Someone's kindness, right? You can't, if you reflected on Sarai's kindness and I reflected on Sarai's kindness, we wouldn't be in the same place. Sarai would be, but we wouldn't be, right? And I think that's more like where the Sefirot are. They are, see, as soon as it, see, the risk of all of this, I think the risk of all of this is in how to make it real. And the risk in making it real is that it becomes a specific location, even if it's a mental location. And that's where we face the difficulty immediately from, for example, the idea of Tzimtzum, of God's divine contraction to give space to the universe, but it's definitely not a physical contraction. It's about being, I think, more than so in some sense, two people in the world can reflect on the same Sefirah.
I think that's what I was asking.
But they are, and I'm trying to think of that analogy of the spring. Are they drinking from the same spring? And I guess they are, but they're drinking it differently.
Why?
I think. Why?
What they derive from it is different.
Why is it different? Because the way
If they hit the same tone.
if they hit right, if they get the same, I guess maybe I'm being a bit postmodern, that every text has a reader. And so there is no such thing as this text says, it's always this text says to me. So when God reveals to each of us differently. So maybe there's a limit. I could see pushback on this. Maybe there's a limit in the idea of the code or the matrix and so on, which is that it becomes too. I might argue against myself now. Wow. There may not be an answer for me. I guess because each Sefirah, I guess it comes back to the tree, that everything is connected. So each Sefirah exists in relation to something else. So for example, as we go through the Omer, when we are relating the Sefirot, so we start with Chesed. Day one is Chesed in Chesed. It's not just Chesed in and of itself. It's Chesed in Chesed. Next day is Chesed in Gevurah, then Chesed in Tiferet, and so on. And so, in some sense, there is a metaphysical reality of Chesedness, but it naturally is, because it is emanation, it is Chesed too. It has to emanate to somewhere. So therefore, you're not in the same place. So to go back to the thing to Sarai's kindness to you is different to Sarai's kindness to me because we are different.
But there is a common vibration.
There is a common aspect. I'm sorry to pick on you, right? There's a common aspect of Sarai's kindness. She is kind. That's why I picked on it, right? She is kind, but it's manifested in different ways. And so maybe you're pointing in a similar direction.
I think you're trying to make it up, and it's hard to do that. Because if there's that same vibration, you and she may be feeling that same at the same time. It may be instantaneous, but it may be there. You can't say it's not there.
No,
I-
right.
I-
No, I'm not saying it's not there. No, I'm definitely not saying it's not there. But what does there mean?
That's
Right.
the question.
There is in the encounter with it, as opposed to, you know, let's put, sorry, this is what happens when you sit next to me. If you put Sarai in a box, would she still be kind? It's like Schrodinger's Sphirot, right? Would she still be kind? The essence would be kindness, but that kindness needs an expression, even in relation to the self. And so I think the Sphirot are the same, that they don't exist in a box, in a metaphysical place. I think each person is a unique manifestation of divinity. Therefore, each interpretation is unique. I think so, in part. Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Jane first, and then I'll come back to you. Go on.
Your original question was whether or not we could relate to putting the Sphirot on a human being. And I guess at this modern view, I find this difficult. I think in the time of Ezekiel, I might understand that because their world was somewhat limited. But I personally do better with the concept of the tree of life, and I do better with the 231 manifestations than I do of having to place this on a physical being. I think
Not necessarily. Yes.
I was just going to say, I think I can understand the essence of what we're getting at better than having to anthropomorphize it.
And one of the challenges here is the Jewish perception of the perfect body. That there is the idea, is a very good book called something like Judaism and Bodies, it's in my office, about the priest has to be perfect, has to be without blemish, without scar or scratch or any kind of wound. And so there is, I would say there is a real challenge in the embodiment of mysticism. That I think as we as modernists are moving away from the idea of the perfect body. Because if nothing else, that is definitely gendered. And the idea of body defining essence and being is difficult, potentially very painful. And so I totally understand. I totally can hear the difficulty of, as soon as you match this onto the body with a picture with 2 arms, right, or 2 legs, immediately you change the dynamic of encounter and move into a different sense of this body is in, this body is out. Is there a color? Is there a size? Is there, if the person has a hunch, as you see this, you see the perfect male. And that I think is very problematic. Philip, and then Phil.
So common prayer, meeting for prayer throughout the world, but in Judaism, creates, the reason that we go there is to create a vibration that brings us to another place, that we're looking to create that.
The word vibration makes me nervous.
So what do we call it?
Energy.
Yeah, see it, and this is a problem. That there's just no words for it, because these words are immediately laden.
Do that.
What are we doing? We are
in all religions.
But I think the mystical experience is different. It's not just a unifying vibration that we're all saying Shema at the same time.
But we're not looking for them in prayer. We're not Kabbalists. We're not looking for that mystical.
Some people.
But I would disagree. Right, I disagree. So that the mystic would say, right, so for some people, this is the difference between keva and kavana. between the fixed prayer and the spontaneous prayer, or rather the fixed prayer and the intention of the prayer. That kavanah is defined actually in two ways. Having the intention to say the letters correctly and having the intention to understand the prayer. And many of us fall into that second camp of having the intention to understand the prayer so that it moves us and changes us. The Kabbalist says, no, this is code. This is
But we're not in that code. I mean, as
Some people
but
are.
right,
well,
some
no, but so Orthodox
are in that second.
are in that second group.
Doesn't matter what your prayer
and-
means.
And they're much more focused. They're much more learned. They understand what they're reading.
The community members tend to be, I think that's fair, or at least the rabbis. They allow the rabbis to understand it for them.
There becomes a tonality there that gets even deeper than where we go.
Well, I disagree. I actually thought on Friday, and it was a very sweet service on Friday. I thought there was people were louder actually in the community on Friday, and there was a tonality which was actually very moving.
So then we go back to that tonality, then drew everybody together, which then created that other level of energy, or what?
Yeah, but why? So what is prayer? It's tapping into, it's recreating the words of creation, tapping into the words of creation, tapping into a name of God, creating a name of God, creating the world in prayer. It's yes, it's all of those things. I think it's more than just a mantra like we're saying the same words. I think that's the key. That it's going beyond the language, it's using the language specifically
To go beyond
to tap into a greater depth, I would say.
Using the language to go beyond the feelings that the language evokes.
Well, it goes beyond feelings.
It
Yes,
goes
goes
beyond
feeling.
feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Phil had a hand up and then it disappeared. He disappeared. Did we answer your question, Phil?
I disappeared to get a plug.
Oh, nice.
But going back to the question of the relationship of the Severo to a physical body, other than the fact that it suggests that no emanations of God ever approach a four-legged animal, for which my cat would disagree. It creates a fundamental error, because the tree of life itself is, of course, not a physical tree. It is not a physical, that's a representation drawn on paper in a way that we can understand it, but that is not a 2 or 3 dimensional construct in any way, shape, or form.
Right, thank you. What we're talking about, it's a spiritual co-creative map. That's not a bad way to put it. Although maps are usually representations of physical things. How can you create a spiritual map? How can you create a map that defines God? And the idea of Ezekiel seeing man, being really clear, Torah speaks in human language, or the Bible speaks in human language. And this is what the Kabbalists are constantly wrestling with, which is that where we would say, or Maimonides might turn around and say, it doesn't really mean a rock. The Kabbalist says, look, the letters Sadi and Resh are teaching us something here. The Tzur is pointing to a deeper reality. So it's not just, we had to use the word rock because there is no other word to describe it. The Kabbalist says, now go into the Tzurness of this. What does that mean? What is that revealing? Because everything reveals. I'm aware that it's 12:15, and I have to leave this building at 12:30 because I have a tombstone unveiling at 1:45. makes me nervous to say, but look, there's chapter 6, verse 1, just you get it now. When I say nervous, I don't mean nervous like I don't trust you. What I mean is that it's 4 pages long, quite deliberately, 6.1 and 6.3, that we move into different kinds of emanations and so on. What I'd like to do, and it does move into this galgal, this I don't want to say reincarnation, this repeating wheel, circle wheel, this repeating circle wheel. What I will say, just as a little bit of a introduction to leave it with you, and you can see the commentaries are really instructive. As we get into chapter 6, we go, Marlene laughed at that, like instructive, but come on, Rabbi Neil, I get it, okay, that's fair. We move into astronomy. That the constellations point to things, and not moving into astrology necessarily, but we are moving into the idea that the stars are aligned in certain ways to teach us certain things. That's different to read your horoscope, a tall dark stranger will cross your path today and you'll be very lucky if, right? It's definitely not that. And it's okay if you turn around and say that's not what astrology really is. What they're doing is they're talking about, for example, on page 22, let me pull it up for others, sorry. Right, so chapter 6, verse 1, we're talking about the 12 diagonal boundaries, and so on, which may well be talking about the different paths of the sun, and so on. So as the cycle of the universe and so on. Certainly it's talking about the bow, the teli. God set them in the teli, and we don't know what the teli is, but may very well be the bow in a constellation and so on. By the time we get to 6.3, we're talking about dragons. So the dragon, the wheel, the heart. Are we talking about Draco, the dragon, the astrological symbol, and so on? It's generally agreed the Tali is astronomical, so the dragon who exercises power over all 6 directions may be as well. What we may be talking about are stars, arrangement of stars, eclipses, and so on. That now we're adding a total extra dimension onto this. Could be, however, as it says here, could be this idea, this myth of the world-forming dragon. The Babylonians had it in the form of Tiamat, where Marduk takes Tiamat and ripped Tiamat, the world-breathing dragon, apart, and uses the top half of her body as the heavens and the bottom half as the earth, basically. And interesting because Tiamat is a chaos dragon, essentially. And so what Marduk does, and note Marduk and Mordechai sound very similar. The Marduk creates order from chaos, which is really interesting because that's kind of what God does in the Torah as well, to take that tohu vavohu, that chaotic state, and creates order from it. It's just that God doesn't rip a being apart to do so. God does it with speech. There is something to be said for, I will say, the primordial sea monsters who are part of Genesis chapter 1, the Taninim Gedolim. So what is a Tanin? If you look in a translation, let's pull out this translation here. Let's see what they say here as a translation for the Taninim Gedolim. It will probably, I'm guessing, say the great sea monsters. That's my guess. Let's see what they say. I've already gone way too far. Let's have a look. The birds of the sky, the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky over all the animal creeping things. Ooh, I can't find the translation immediately. Probably the great sea monsters. The great sea giants. God created the great sea giants. That's an interesting translation. Tanin is reptile. We know that. Excuse me. There we go. We know that from the fact that Aaron's staff at one point is a nachash, which is a snake. At another point is a tanin, which means it must be a larger term. So it's really interesting when people look at the taninim gadolim, which translates as great reptiles, because there are some people like Jerry Schroeder who turn around and say, that's dinosaurs. It's clearly not dinosaurs. They didn't know of dinosaurs, but what they did know of was giant sea dragons. They did know of that kind of thing. It doesn't want to name them as giant sea dragons, but it certainly seems that as you get to the end of Sefer Yetzirah, you change track immediately from this combination of letters and trying to speech as an emanation of God and so on, suddenly into stars, constellations, and possibly even allusions to the wheels of the divine chariot in Ezekiel, the wheels that go round, and so on. It becomes a very different book. And I'll be honest and say, I find much more appealing in the beginning of the book than the end of the book. And that may be to do with my perspective on astrology as well. But I understand why they are connecting the sphirot and the letters and the emanations to the stars around them, because they're there. Because it's, if you're imagining gateways around you or above you, you look up, what do you see? You see the stars. So are these pointing to other things as well? They don't know what the stars are. So they must be pointing to something. They don't know them as giant balls of plasma and gas and so on, burning, billions of miles away. They see them in the firmament. And so they see them as pointers, essentially. And so if everything is rife with meaning, and if you know that there are other peoples in the world who are finding meanings in the stars, then you know what? Maybe connecting them somehow. Because it's like, what's interesting is that is moving away from the generative, creative idea of the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, and is moving more into how do we connect with the world around us, or particularly given that, and this is a very Jewish thing, given that other people are doing this, how do we do it but make it Jewish? The Seder service is the example I always give. The Romans used to lean to the left when they ate. They used to start a meal with a sprig of parsley dipped in salt water. Rabbi Gamliel, who who's very assimilated, spends a lot of time with Romans and Greeks, says, you know what, that's really interesting. Why don't we do that, but we'll make it Jewish, and we'll say, this is the spring and the tears of the Israelites. Similarly, the Sefer Yetzirah might be turning around and saying, okay, we know all these people around us engage in astrology, so how do we do it in a Jewish way? And the answer is to connect it to Ezekiel's chariot, which we looked at many weeks ago, is to connect it in a mystical sense. Aware of time, the wrap-up. From this, where do you go? How does this change anything in your Judaism? Is this academic? Is this spiritual, moving? What's the next avenue? How do you respond to 4 weeks of Jewish mysticism, which has taken us from away? How do we go away from Santa Fe woo-woo into this is actually a deeply religious thing, to the Merkava mysticism, and then into the Sefer Yetzirah? Where from here for you, or how has this changed anything for you? Is this something real, unreal, useful, not useful, interesting but academic, or perhaps practical? Any of your thoughts? We've got about 5 minutes before I have to lock up. Sarai first.
I'm still really not good at Hebrew, and so I just concentrate when we're singing and doing prayers, on trying to pronounce things correctly. But now I feel like there's a dimension of, the sounds being more profound and more, I don't know, I don't want to say vibration,
Yeah,
but,
sure.
you know, like the tones and the sounds being more significant to me.
Thank you. Jane.
Well, I kind of find the older I get, the more complicated life has gotten. So I guess that, you know, you look at when you're young, you learn the prayers, you know, for what they are. But the Kavanah becomes greater. And I find that as the years have gone by, and particularly for me in the last 10 years, those prayers have become more significant, but I think it's more significant in the letters I'm looking at and what I'm hearing. And I think it gives me permission to explore the relationship of that prayer to God more so than maybe it has in the past, because sometimes you're not sure what to do with what you're hearing every week. But I know when I go to shul every week, I'm hearing and feeling different things. And I think this allows that avenue for me to get closer and to feel that.
Thank you. And Aliyah added the idea that the Torah itself and each portion is a separate name of God, just changes how we read Torah. You know, it's interesting for me that we have very few people who come on Saturday morning. And there had been talk about to get rid of the Saturday morning service. And I said, you can't. I said, you have to read Torah. And it's really interesting. There's a discussion between leaders in the community. It's like, if they're not coming, don't bother. And I'm like, but it's Torah, right? And maybe part of that is this mystical thing from me of like, you can't not read Torah. So it's interesting, even reading it from a Chumash, because there were 8 people and then 9 after the Torah service yesterday. I was like, but I really like this yearning to read Torah because it is an expression of God. Maybe that is part of it as well. Any other final thoughts?
Let's see if I can put this into words. I experience Torah as so powerful, and I don't understand why, but it is the sound and it's like the genesis of us. And I don't know why I don't go to morning services, except that I just have so much else to do, but I think I should. And I think I also experienced something through you about the sacredness of the practice of study. Like you've spent your life studying Torah and teaching Judaism and teaching Torah. And when you blessed us before our trip, which I really needed, we had the most blessed trip. It was like perfect. It was just an amazing trip. And I think there's something there. I think there's something there.
So of the words creating reality almost. I'm not a magician, but I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, it's you know, you've spent your life doing this.
Okay.
So it's like whose blessing almost.
Interesting. Thank you. Any other thoughts reflecting on 4 weeks of mysticism?
So can we do, you talked about maybe possibility of a study group just on, so I can't say it.
Sephira?
Sephira.
Oh, Sefer Yetzirah?
Yeah. As a possibility.
Or hammer.
Or
Or both.
It's just that you've whetted more of my appetite.
okay, that's good.
So-
Always leave them wanting more.
Yeah.
But then where to go with this? Because this isn't just some trite educational thing.
No.
let me think about, okay.
Okay.
How do I put this? There's a lot happening right now. And I actually really enjoy, sharing this, being on this journey with you. And I want to do more of this. The question is when and how to do it.
Right.
At the moment, my mind is in two places of wanting to hear everyone's feedback and also needing to be at the cemetery. And I want to be able to give time and space for this that is meaningful and real. So let me know. So let me think about how we do that, because I do think it's important, and I do think there is a thirst for it. Any other thoughts?
In a disciplined way.
In a disciplined way, in a real way, not a Kabbalah group where we get together and sit and breathe and so on.
Yeah.
But maybe working through these texts again more. Well, look, we'll pause here. How about we say that?
Okay.
We'll pause here. And I want to thank you, because it's interesting, because this was created for the Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Interesting to think about, it got to about midnight and we're like, should we start this? Can you imagine doing this at like 2 o'clock in the morning? In some sense, maybe, right? Because maybe that makes you more open to it. But I really appreciate, what I appreciate is the sensitivity to the language and the nuance of this, and moving beyond the simplistic and actually exploring this. This is a deeply profound religious mystical thing, and being able to read a text and turn it into something mystical and explore. For me, I just really appreciate everyone who's here who's been able to do this so far. We'll probably say like that. So thank you, everyone. Really, thank you. As always, if you have questions, email me, and let's see what we can do. I'm going to end our Zoom. So thank you to everyone online.
Thank you, Rabbi.